Hi, and welcome to HR Talks with HM Pinnacle Consulting. I'm here with Cara, my better half, in the HR world. And I think, Cara, we're going to talk a little bit about executive mishaps and maybe when leadership falters a bit and how HR manages that.
Yes, this is one that I have witnessed but have not been as um, directly involved in. However, I have done exit interviews, I hear stories, I've helped compile information for my leadership that maybe are leaders who are fearless and visionaries and do their best to keep things, moving forward in a successful way. Sometimes, like we mentioned at our last podcast, there can be missteps or mistakes made. So, Heather, with all your wisdom and experience, the topic here is how do we, as employees, or maybe I don't hate the word subordinates, but let's just call it that for the time being,
Sure.
how do we support and maybe lead our bosses and our leadership if there is an investigation or a PR crisis, a scandal? What does that look like when it involves folks who are higher above the food chain, on the food chain than us?
Yeah, I will say it's probably one of the most complicated areas to weave in between in HR because usually you as an HR professional also report to whoever that C-level is that you're having to deal with, right? So there's this balancing act. The one thing I always remind people in HR is you have to be Switzerland. You have to be completely out of the fray. And that comes in many ways. One, with how you start your career in that organization, you really lay some groundwork at that point with the CEOs or the C levels that say, hey, I may report to you, but my role is very independent, and here's why, and here's how that supports you, and here's how you're going to get a better opportunity to grow your organization and your culture if I'm not seen as your subordinate, for lack of a better term, right?
Mhm.
But as someone who is here to support and coach and mentor the employees and yourself. And so that's how I always start it. Because otherwise, when you get that complaint in your office that, hey, the C level has done blah, 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 and we can get into some really great, juicy things there, but has done blah, blah, blah. And you're the person who they usually see answering to the C level, they're not going to come tell you. Like, they're not, because they have no idea that you can be non-biased in that moment and actually dive into that investigation. So it's difficult, but you have to like lay that groundwork when you first
Yeah.
start in an organization when you're that high level HR. But I will tell you, even then, it doesn't matter. It's the hardest thing. Investigations suck in general. I hate investigations. Just hate them because there has to be a winner in them, right? There's never just a, oh, everything's fine. There's always a consequence of some sort, even if it's, hey, you two need to learn how to work together, or hey, both of you are at fault, or whatever it is, right? It's an awkward, uncomfortable kind of situation for all parties involved. But then you have to realize that most times it spreads like wildfire, no matter how
Mhm.
much you want to keep things confidential. So when it's your C level that you're dealing with and that starts to spread, it erodes trust. It erodes an ability to feel like you can be in that organization, even if that poor person who's in that C level didn't do anything wrong. And after the
Yep.
investigation, it comes out that they were clean through it, it doesn't matter, right? The damage is already done at that point. So that's why I think investigations are such a terrible word, unless you get to that point where you have to. I truly do think managing up is how you do it. And managing up is different than investigating, right? And so I like to teach employees, but also leaders how to manage up. And it really has everything to do with making sure that you are building a really strong foundation, a relationship with your C levels. And that comes through communication. It comes through understanding the vision and the drive of the organization and how what you do or your team does supports that. Because once you know that, it's easier to figure out what makes them tick so that you can communicate in a level that's going to get you what you need for your team, but provide them with what they want in
Yeah.
exchange for it. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. And I appreciate that you actually started, this starts before even the incident, let's
Yeah.
call it, happens. And I appreciate that you took a step back to be like, there is a moment there, well, even before the moment happens, that building of trust, that engagement really matters so that when the volcano explodes, we can be seen as Switzerland. And then also, I think to your point, there's the managing up, and then there's investigations too. And maybe we can dig into this a little bit deeper because if you have stories, but I do think let's call it PR situations. And
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately, I do think there's leadership, like leadership is held to a higher standard. They're the public facing group, and we are all human and we all make mistakes. But if, to piggyback off of our last podcast, if I have a relationship in the workplace, it might be a little bit different than if the CEO or a C-level executive or someone really high up has a relationship. And that, I would say, depending on their circumstances, is more of a PR crisis, not necessarily a, if let's assume it's a lateral relationship, two consenting individuals that just decide to go into this relationship, but still there'll be gossip, there'll be drama, there'll be those
Oh
conversations.
yeah.
That's a PR crisis. So that's going to be my next question, is how do we handle that particular PR crisis? Or then there's the investigation side of, maybe it's more like a sexual harassment claim where there
Yeah.
was, or a financial scandal, or a power differential, and then it becomes more of a negative association. So how, as HR, do we partner with our other team members internally, but also engage that leader in those two scenarios? And do you have any, well, this is gonna be hard. Are there stories that you're able to share around teams that you can talk to that you've seen?
Yes, sadly enough, yes.
Same.
So I think to go back to what you're saying, you truly do have to have a tight enough relationship with your C levels when you're in HR so that you can have that quick conversation that says, "Hey, this is what I'm hearing, this is what's going on, this is what is spreading around, this is what someone has concerns about. Let's talk about it," right? I'm not judging you as your HR professional. I'm judging the situation and how it's impacting the organization, right? And as an HR professional, always, 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 and sometimes we forget this, which is why that operational HR is important. Always remember what you're looking for in every scenario, whether it's an investigation, a PR crisis, whatever, what's in the best interest of the organization's health and strength,
Mhm.
right? It's not about that one individual who potentially did something wrong, or it's not about the gossip mill. All of that can get rectified. It's about what's best for the organization's health. And HR is responsible for that just as much as the C levels are and the
Mhm.
employees, et cetera, right? So when you go into those scenarios, always think about in the back of your head, am I doing this because I'm interested and it's gossipy? Am I doing this because it truly is impacting the organization? Am I engaging in something that's just spreading the rumors around? Like, go through it and really pick it apart in your own brain first to make sure you know what you're trying to accomplish before you go and start that conversation. Because once you start that conversation, you can't stop it, right?
And when, I'm so sorry, but
No,
when
go
would you
ahead.
bring in our partners? Because that's the other thing that I love about, and this is going to be more, I would call it, on the PR, the communication side, but we have legal sometimes, and we have marketing and communications. At what point, when it is just kind of like, okay, hey, there's been talks that the English teacher and the gym teacher are getting married, and we're all kind of buzzing about it. How and when do we bring in those partners to engage, so that it's not becoming kind of a gossip mill of like, oh my goodness, did you hear that this is happening?
And great question. And so I even bring in, when you're adding partners, investigators too. So a lot
Mm,
of times I'll bring in an outside investigator depending upon the level of complaint and or the level of leadership that's involved in it.
okay.
Because then you're taking it completely out of house, right? So you're no longer having to be impacted by that as an HR professional. You're managing someone on the outside who is leading that investigation. Usually, sometimes you get better conversations from people because they don't have a relationship with the HR person, or they don't worry that HR is going to report it back to the C level, et cetera, right? So you get a lot better results that way. So I'm a big believer that if it is going to be a PR nightmare, you bring PR and marketing in immediately,
Okay.
even before you start the investigation, and not by saying, "Hey, this is what's going on," but more a, "Hey, we potentially are going to have some kind of a PR situation coming up. I'm just giving you a heads up. I'll keep you informed as things move forward." I don't give them any details, but they need to be prepared because the worst is if you come to the end and then you start bringing them in, right?
Mm,
Um, Also, I prefer outside PR houses than inside marketing houses for anything that has to do with an organization's leadership. You want to keep everyone possible outside of an investigation and or a PR nightmare that's internally reporting to those C levels. It's critical. Because at the end of the day, most of those PR nightmares don't always end with a termination of that C level, which means
Yeah.
everyone who has now been impacted and had to do the PR spin, had to be in a room with the person who we now know was sleeping with the school teacher or whatever, right? Even though it may not be fireable, it's still inappropriate, right? And so then there's this awkward tension between the C levels and these leaders or employees, and these leaders or employees are like, worried to have a conversation with the C level or constantly thinking about that. So it destroys and deteriorates credit and culture so much. I always try and go outside house if it's going to be a C level PR or investigation, always.
Okay. And let's say now, to your point, there has been some sort of serious misconduct done by a C-level executive. What do we do? Because to your point, very likely, like who do we even go to? What does the next steps look like? Because very likely they aren't going to be the ones. I mean, can we say as just an HR director, you can't just be like, hey, CEO, you're going to be terminated, or can you? I don't know. But let's say now there's been gross misconduct done by a CEO, and there's been multiple complaints that have been given as a part of exit interviews, internal feedback loops. What do we do then?
So I've actually had this scenario
Okay.
in one of the organizations that I supported years ago. And there were, from the moment I started, there were complaints about the CEO. And they were small little complaints like, you know what, he doesn't allow women in the leadership team, or um, he looks down at me or doesn't communicate with me because I'm female. Things like that. And so I'm like, okay, people are just trying to get a feel for HR, this kind of stuff. So you pocket it away because you don't have any history or knowledge of it, and it's not a complaint at that point. But it continues to happen, right? And then you hear more and more of these juicy details. In this particular situation, it was one of those things where I sat on the leadership team. And so I was like, okay, well, they do have women on the leadership team. So I kind of negated that concept. But then I hear this horrifying story that comes back at a Christmas party where his wife didn't show for the Christmas party for whatever reason. And so, alcohol was involved because you got to have that at Christmas parties, which is a nightmare to HR. Anyway, so he starts hitting on one of the leadership team, female leadership team, and mentioning how much her dress would look better if it was shorter, and started to pull it up a bit onto her thighs as opposed to down past her knees where the dress was. And she, being the only female at the time on the leadership team, there's a hard balance to walk. So she doesn't want to come across as someone who potentially shouldn't be on leadership because she's too emotional, blah, 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 even if you're at a
Oh
Christmas party.
no.
Oh, yeah. And everyone watched this. He did it in front
Oh,
of other employees, right? So she came to talk to me about this. And this had happened before I had started, but she came to talk to me about this. And so I was like, whoa, are there other people who can vouch for or verify this? And she said, oh, yeah, all of these people were at this Christmas party. Well, that's where loyalty came in. So when I interviewed people, and I didn't do a, hey, I'm doing an investigation. I did a, hey, I heard that there might have been something that happened at the Christmas party that potentially could be impacting relationships here. So I want to know if you can fill me in on what occurred between these two employees. And the loyalty side would kick in, and some of the people would be like, oh, no, no, I never saw anything. No. And you
oh
could
my
tell from
God.
their reaction, they were trying to protect the CEO. And so then you're like, wow. And then you'd hear the other half of the people who actually were being honest and like, hey, yeah, this is exactly what happened. Then he grabbed her butt. And she's like, she made a scene and then left, right? And then all of a sudden, he found out that we had had questions about it, and then he wanted to terminate her. And he said it was due to her work. And I was like, I don't have anything showing her performance is poor. Why would we be terminating her at this point in time? And so that's where the PR nightmare comes in, is when the C level is trying to cover something that's occurred, because they think that's the best way to handle it. And then that just blows it up, right? Because all she has to do is go find an attorney or talk to someone, etc.
Mhm.
When you have a C level, usually, not always, usually there's a board, there's a parent company, there's someone that you can go to handle dealing with that investigation, that complaint, that termination, whatever it is. If there isn't, like a standalone company, like a mom and pop kind of company that doesn't have anyone but themselves, unfortunately, there's no one else to go to. And so you have that conversation with them and you let them know what should have been done or what shouldn't have been done. You let them know what the laws are all about. But at the end of the day, You can't fire someone who owns their own company, right? You can step away from it. You can file reports against them if it's legal, but you can't terminate them, right?
Mhm.
And so in those moments, it's really hard. And I've had that too, where the employee was right and the owner was wrong, but it's their company. And so all I can do is go in and say, hey, your behavior impacted your organization negatively, which is impacting your bottom line, which, I know you don't want. But number two, it actually was illegal for you to sexually harass that employee, right? There's laws in Washington state and federal laws that protect those employees from those kinds of words coming out of your mouth, right? And so I really need you to know you can't do that. You have to change it. And they can say, yes, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Or they could say, no, this is, you know what? They need a tougher skin if they're going to work in this environment, which is what that one did. They need a tougher skin if they're going to work in this environment because that's just how I talk to people. And so the best I can do is go back to that employee and say, I'm sorry, but if this is uncomfortable for you, you might need to leave because I can't stop an employer from doing what they're going to do. You can file a suit. I can file a suit as an HR professional,
Okay.
but I can't terminate someone who owns their own company without having a board or a higher up parent company.
Oh my gosh.
Those
I'm
are the
so
hard ones.
thankful that you said that because, I mean, part of the reason why this conversation is happening is I'm thankful you're able to share an actual story because I've seen it. Even at my level,
Yeah.
I have seen things happen. I have seen, to your point, sometimes it's just whispers or complaints, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't get this promotion because of this or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes
You always
there's
weigh
just,
those out.
complaining, but then there's sometimes where that is gross misconduct. And unfortunately, it sounds like, wow, there's only so much we can do. Because even if you do take it to the board, sometimes they're like, you know what? It's worth the risk. We need this individual to stay. And then the employees are out there left hanging. And I appreciate though that you're willing to give them the options of like, hey, like this is what this is. However, in truth, this is all we can. We are doing everything we can. But then I also think, unfortunately, that HR gets looked upon poorly and there's a breakdown of trust because we've done everything in our power, but there's only so much one can do. And that's where I think it gets really, really difficult. But I love what you did. And I actually seen managers who I really respect, but there was an incident where, actually two incidents where ethics and morals and values were brought into question.
Mhm.
One was a bit more
Yeah.
personal. One was where she just saw this particular C level making a decision that she did not personally agree with, not necessarily a true misconduct piece, but was like, I would rather take a step back because it's a breach of my trust and how I view just a misalignment of values. So the other one was trying actually to, take it up to the powers that be, but in doing
Yeah.
so was found out by their supervisor and was let go before the conversations were had. But it did lead to
Retaliation.
a large fallout from HR, talent acquisition. A lot of employees left. So there are consequences that, and we were fortunate enough to be in this situation where we could step back. Some others can't because they need that income until they find another role.
They
So
do.
this is a very interesting conversation, and I'm grateful for that story because it doesn't always turn out perfectly like a fairy tale,
Yeah,
but you do the best you can with what you have. And I appreciate
you
that.
do. And I will say, as an HR professional, be careful that you know what your ethics and your morals and your standards are too. Because I've actually left companies because the leadership would not change, and I knew that their behavior was something that I could not tolerate as an HR professional.
Yeah.
One, it wasn't legal. Two, I absolutely felt for every single employee in that culture. And if you can't make a decision on how to improve that as a leader, or you choose not to improve it as a leader, then as the HR professional, I have to make the decision on whether it meets with my ethical standards as well. And as an HR professional, and that's a topic we can always talk about at some
Yeah.
point, but we need to be careful because we're liable too, right? I've had my name on a lawsuit before. And it's the most petrifying, scary thing in the whole world when you get this paperwork that says we're suing this company and HR and the owner because of this behavior. Because our job as HR professionals are to make sure that the employees are protected in that organization.
Yeah.
So you have to make those hard decisions too in HR and say, okay, is this going to change? Do I see this improving? Or is this just the standard that this company feels is acceptable?
Okay, one last question before we close.
Okay.
But let's say, you don't agree and it wasn't legal. How do you, as an HR professional or someone on the leadership team or a part of that situation, protect yourself to say, okay, like we're being sued, but I didn't agree and I did my part. What do you do to help make sure that you are protected?
I always have my documentation,
Okay.
right? Documentation, 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 right? So from an HR perspective, that's where I stand on the letter of the law, right? So when that happens, I'm the one who can provide the documentation saying, here's where we got the complaint, here's the complaint signature, here's what the investigation process was, here was what the outcome was, here's what we attempted to do, and here's where it's at, right? So you just always have everything documented, whether you're a supervisor in HR, whoever you are, right? Have your documentation really, really good. Make sure that there's dates on it, that there's signatures on it, that there's names of people on it, all of that kind of stuff, because that does come into question. And that's exactly what happened in that situation. Was they asked for any and all of the documentation because she had said that she had filed a complaint and no one had investigated it, which is why my name was on the lawsuit as well.
Oh,
And it had been investigated. She didn't like the outcome though. And so it's one of those things where you would just produce the documentation and say, here's everything I have to show that we accomplished what we were supposed to inside this organization to the best of our ability. And then from there, you just hope that's good enough, and then you'd be ready to stand on that, right? So good documentation.
always the documentation. I,
Oh
I
yeah.
love me some good documentation.
I know, me too. I'm sorry I killed so many trees. I'm a paper junkie, man. Never a reason not to have everything written out, signed, documented, all of that. Yeah.
I love it. And thank you for sharing. This is a sensitive topic. It's a hard
Yeah.
one to navigate. And to quote Brené Brown, like, we are not toothpaste. We are human beings. We have feelings, we have values, we have morals, we have thoughts. Like,
True.
we are no longer just expected to be a company brand or represent this company as, okay, I am Colgate or whatever it might be. We are
Yeah.
humans and it's hard for us to come into work. And sometimes, all of us make mistakes, but it's how do we respond to those mistakes and how do we support all parties, even if it's a wrong party? What do we do to make it right? So thank
Yeah.
you for
Agree.
sharing because I was very curious about this one.
This one's a hard one. This is an awkward one where I always recommend people talk to other HR professionals or
Yeah,
get a second opinion or whatever if you've never dealt with it, because it's a landmine if you don't.
it is. Oh, also love our legal teams. Always love
Yes.
them too.
Shout out to all legal teams.
Well, with that, this concludes our HR talks with HM Pinnacle. So just remember, if you think you've had a bad day in HR, every challenge is an opportunity to grow. So thanks for spending time with HM Pinnacle. Until next time.
Take care. Thanks, guys.